Hi everyone, my name is Anna Wadwa. I am an MD PhD student with Harvard Medical School and the MIT Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics. Today I want to talk about a couple things, both my background and how I got into the field of space medicine and aerospace physiology, and then also give sort of a brief overview of the field as well as tangential field. So not just space medicine, but also biology and other extreme environments and how interrelated they all are. And then we'll wrap up with sort of a conversation about how you can get involved, um, and other resources like that might be helpful for you. Okay. All right, so this is sort of an iconic picture of Bruce McCandless back from, I think, 1984, according to my slides. And I believe it was the first untethered spacewalk. So he's floating here completely untethered, unassociated with really anything else that's going on in the world, with the space station, um, with the space shuttle because I think this was a space shuttle time, but I might be wrong. And it's really an iconic picture for a lot of reasons, right? It's a lot of firsts, but really, I think this picture speaks to what space medicine is about in terms of really it's everything encompassing this human body. It inspires a lot of people. And so that's what I study right now, but it's not as flashy as it might seem in this picture. Um, Sometimes it can be, as I'll show like throughout the slides, but there's also ways that we can study it in the lab, not, for example, with NASA, that might help still understand what's happening in with the human body in space. So there's a lot of different ways to study the field, a lot of different ways to approach it, and I hope to give sort of an overview of that throughout this talk. Okay, so as I mentioned, I'm at Harvard Medical School right now. There are two different programs within Harvard for the medical school. There's something called the Pathways program and something called the Health Sciences and Technology program, or HST. I am in HST. Um, it has sort of a different approach from Pathways, which is very like case-based collaborative learning. HST is a lot more lecture heavy, didactics, things like that. But above all, it really promotes the development of us as physician scientists. And so, more than just learning the clinical medicine, we're also being taught how to ask why, right? Like, why do we know this medicine works? Why do we know this disease happens in this way? How do we know that? How can we trust that data? Um, and I think that's a very valuable skill to have for young investigators, regardless of what field you're going into. It's not enough to just sort of accept the literature as it is. You have to be willing to ask why, to understand what's going on below the surface. And asking why is also how you're going to be able to shift the field, right? If you're accepting everything as it is, you're not going to be able to push the boundaries of what's going on. You have to be willing to ask why. And so I think that's a very important lesson that sort of is larger than what you learn from medical school itself, knowing that you have to ask why. I am also at the MIT Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics, which is a little odd. Like, as a biologist, I'm in the aerospace engineering department. So I get to, my claim to fame is that, I get to say that I'm an aerospace engineer and I hang out with rocket scientists, but I am a biologist at heart. Um, I think what I want to share from this is that it's really important to surround yourself with interdisciplinary teams. This is going to sound a little corny, but there's something called the science of science, which is trying to reverse engineer the scientific method to understand what factors drive scientific innovation most effectively. And, we all know, teamwork makes the dream work and things like that, but there's actually data to support it. We have concrete data to say collaboration and interdisciplinary teams will make you a more effective and impactful scientist. And so, even if you're a biologist or vice versa, if you're an engineer, go hang out with people from like an opposite field from you. Learn what they're doing, learn how they're doing it, try to pick up transferable skills. That'll take you very, very far in your career. Okay, I didn't start in fancy name schools like Harvard Medical School or MIT. I'm from California originally, but I went to undergrad at the New Jersey Institute of Technology, sort of a small polytechnic school in Newark, New Jersey, and I majored in biochemistry there, but again, thinking about interdisciplinary work, I also did minors in philosophy and math. And I think, again, having that kind of well-rounded education lets you speak to a lot of different groups. It doesn't even matter if, it's relevant for your professional career. Like, I'm not really actively using a philosophy minor right now, but it helps me speak to a lot of different groups because now I have a background in biomedical ethics and logic and cyber psychology because I took all of those classes for my minor. And when those come up in, again, interdisciplinary conversations, I have something valuable to add because I have experience in that. Or, for example, my math classes, I learned how to do computational neuroscience and I learned MATLAB for that. And that has paid dividends in my career, as I'll talk about later during this talk. So, again, just encouraging you all to explore different interdisciplinary options, exploring new skills. I think it's really important to be open to a lot of things, even if you don't think that's necessarily what you want to do exactly. I'll admit, when I started in undergrad, I knew I wanted to be a doctor, but I didn't know anything about space medicine. So all of you are ahead of the curve if that's what you're interested in. Um, but I explored a lot of different options throughout my undergrad, whether it was doing math research or, for example, like working in a neurobiology lab or a lot of different other experiences. Being open to new things is how you're going to sort of be in tune with new opportunities that arise. You never want to prematurely shut yourself off from an opportunity. So as I alluded to, I didn't really know about space medicine when I started in undergrad. So I did a lot of different experiences. But in my senior year of undergrad, I was shadowing in emergency medicine, and one of the physicians happened to be aerospace medicine certified. And he kind of, as we were talking about emergency medicine, he shares, "Hey, do you want to learn about space medicine too?" And again, being open to new opportunities, I was like, absolutely, that sounds incredible. I've never heard of it before, but tell me more. Um, and having that drive of tell me more is really, really important, I think, for young students. And so, he told me about the work that he was doing with NASA trying to figure out something called our Exploration Medical Capabilities, or XMC. And XMC broadly is trying to do sort of this volume benefit analysis of different medical hardwares to determine what would be the most useful and applicable medical equipment we would need on a mission, whether that's a mission to low Earth orbit, like on the space station, or to the moon, or to Mars. Trying to understand the wide array of medical tools we have available and then figuring out what would be the most useful is a really important thing to have. And so he was telling me about this, and I'm like, wow, I am completely hooked. How do I get involved? And so he encouraged me to apply to NASA internships, and I was accepted. This was around COVID time, so everything was remote. But I was accepted to an internship at Johnson Space Center working in their radiation biophysics lab. And my work at that time included something called, radiation and microgravity immune related risks. Basically, I was taking a wide look at the literature in both rodent and cell studies, so spaceflight analog studies, not necessarily spaceflight missions themselves. Um, but one thing that's really important to note is that, there's a lot of different stressors associated with spaceflight, like we'll talk about later. radiation and microgravity being some of the biggest. And a lot of the studies in the past and even now have only looked at radiation and microgravity alone, not in conjunction. And what we found by doing this review analysis was that the combination of radiation and microgravity really creates new health risks that haven't really been well established. And so I argued that we need to be doing both individual and combined studies to really understand what's happening in this synergistic interaction. And so that's something, again, to keep in mind, right? It's not just about what you're studying alone. For example, let's say you're studying microgravity. You have to keep in mind the whole system of what's happening in space. Okay, and then I did another internship at Ames Research Center. This was all during a gap year after I graduated from NJIT. And at Ames, I was studying fatigue countermeasures. And so that basically entails there's a lot of different circadian disruptions that astronauts and pilots experience. And we were trying to understand how can we improve all of that circadian disruption, all of that fatigue that they're experiencing, and doing a clinical trial basically to look at the effect of blue light glasses. So we were waking up these poor participants throughout the night, asking them to do math when they woke up, and then we either gave them blue light glasses or not, and trying to see if that reduced what we call their sleep inertia. So how fast were they able to come back to their baseline level of cognitive performance if they were using the blue light glasses. I felt a little bad for them. I mean, I felt bad for myself for having to wake up, but at least I didn't have to do math, unlike our participants. And then I sort of switched gears a little. I did an internship with the Goddard Institute for Space Studies. I'm not sure if it's still around. I think it might have gotten shut down in these recent rounds of budget cuts and everything, but I was with GISS working on something called the PACE satellite mission. PACE stands for Plankton, Aerosol, Cloud, and Ocean Ecosystem. It's the first satellite to be taking images of the Earth in the UV range, not just the visible light range. And so a lot of our analytical algorithms for example, ocean health monitoring were restricted to the visible light range. And so I was working on extending those algorithms to the UV range as well, trying to understand how much error they might have at that range. How can we reduce the error? How can we model systems appropriately? And again, I'm a biologist. This was entirely computational, and I felt, I'll admit, very much out of my wheelhouse. I wasn't in the lab with a pipette. I wasn't working with cells or anything like that. Everything was on my computer. And so it was hard, I'll admit, but the skills I learned from pushing myself to learn all of those computational skills, learning how to code, were really valuable, right? If I hadn't taken those math courses in undergrad and learned how to work in MATLAB, work in Python. For those experiences, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to work at GISS doing, satellite algorithm development. And then, now when I'm doing, for example, my data analysis computationally, I wouldn't have had that foundation that I built in undergrad. And so again, just really trying to emphasize like learn as much as you can. Like push yourself to acquire new habits, constantly ask yourself, what else are other fields doing that I could be using that could be helpful for me, no matter what I'm studying, right? Really try and explore those different kind of transferable skills will be very valuable for you. At the end result of this GISS internship, we have been presenting at various conferences, the absorption spectra, all of our algorithm development, this model for phytoplankton in the UV range. And, my supervisor, Yasik, was very kind actually. There were four of us interns who worked on it. I was the first one, and then other interns after me sort of cemented what I did and formalized it, and they've called it the task model after our initials, which I think is a really nice sort of memento that he gave to us. And again, I wouldn't be the A in the task model if I didn't have those skills. So this is something that's really, really meaningful to me, even though it's not space medicine or space biology exactly. It's a little bit, different. Okay. Switching gears a little bit to talk about space medicine and other extreme environments. A really sort of sci-fi-esque idea that's been floating around in the field is something called artificial gravity, right? It's not a new concept. It's been around since forever. 2001: A Space Odyssey, maybe the one of the best sci-fi movies of all time. If you guys haven't watched it, I highly recommend. Um, had artificial gravity, right, rotating spacecrafts. Um, Nowadays, with VAST, which is developing Haven 1, I think Haven 1 launched, Haven 1 demo at least launched earlier this year. They're launching Haven 2 maybe early next year or the year after. Will also be implementing artificial gravity eventually into their spacecrafts, rotating the spacecraft to create some level of gravity so that astronauts or crew members aren't experiencing microgravity all the time. A little bit of gravity is better than nothing. And so they had some cool VR demos, that's me on the right, exploring Haven 1 through VR, which is really neat. So my point is artificial gravity is not a new concept. But in terms of data, we don't have a lot of data to show like what level of artificial gravity is important or how useful is artificial gravity. And again, I think taking, like I was talking about earlier, asking why, right? Why do we know artificial gravity will work? Why do we know what level of artificial gravity Haven should achieve? We don't. And so doing experiments to address those questions has been really important. And one thing that's been associated with artificial gravity is this idea that it can help prevent the bone loss that astronauts experience while in spaceflight. So, if you don't know, astronauts experience a lot of bone loss throughout their time in space. One of the countermeasures for that is loading. So, for example, impact on the bone. Obviously, that's hard to get while you're in space because you don't have gravity to, cause that sort of like impact force on the bones. You know, they do, I think, about 2 hours of exercise every single day to try and get some level of bone loading. For example, this is Sunita Williams, an astronaut, running and trying to get that level of bone loading. But it's not enough. Even with, those nutrition countermeasures, exercise countermeasures, they still experience a lot of loss in spaceflight. And so artificial gravity might be a way to counteract that. And that's where something called the MHU missions come in. I was a part of the MHU-8 team that was looking at different levels of artificial gravity from 0 G, 1/3 G, 2/3 G, and 1 G. We wanted to understand what's happening to our physiological systems at that level or at those different levels of gravity. And
10,
so
9,
I I hope the audio is coming
7,
through.
6,
Is it
5,
of the
4,
video?
3, 2,
Okay.
1. Engine full power and liftoff of PRS-27. Go Falcon, go Dragon.
Falcon 9 soars off the launch pad. Dragon now on its way to the International Space Station with important new science experiments and crew supplies.
So you can't hear in this video, but I was actively crying during this launch because that was my science on that launch, right? At the top of that rocket was our MHU-8 mission. And so we're watching this from pretty close to the launch pad. You can feel the rumble, you can feel the boosters going as it's launching to the space station. And you're thinking, wow, like I'm having that impact on science. That's my science that's going up there right now. And so it was a absolutely valuable experience for me in that sense, but professionally, but also emotionally, thinking, wow, like this is space medicine. This is what it means to be involved in such an exciting field like this. And so I highly encourage all of you, even if you're not, actively involved in a space mission, if you ever have the chance to go watch a rocket launch, absolutely take that opportunity up because it will shift what you think is like a powerful experience, right? It's more than just the rumble of an airplane. It's really, you can feel the rumble in your chest of the rockets. And so It's a really, really valuable experience to have, I think. Anyway, so that was our MHU-8 launch. And then what we launched specifically was something called the Multiple Artificial Gravity Research System, or MARS. We're all about our acronyms in the space field. And MARS consists of these different little cages where one mouse is in each cage, and then they're assembled into this giant contraption, and this contraption rotates. And the speed with which it rotates at different RPMs will dictate when they're in space how much gravity or artificial gravity the rodents are experiencing. So, for example, this is a mouse in microgravity. You can see he's floating around. I think he turns upside down at some point. Yeah, so he's floating in microgravity, whereas if they're in artificial gravity being rotated, he looks completely normal. You know, that could have been a video from Earth and we wouldn't have even known. And so our goal was to look at 0G through 1G, all of these partial levels of artificial gravity, and understand that sort of dose associated response. And what we found was really, really interesting. Like on the bone side of things, 1/3 G, which you might not know, is sort of similar to Martian gravity. Martian gravity was not enough to help preserve bone loss or help prevent bone loss at that gravity level, but 1G was. But one thing I want to talk about is that, we found on the bone side of things that 1G was really the threshold necessary to maintain bone health in space. The muscle team, for example, found that 1/3 G or 2/3 G was enough. And so there's these tissue specific patterns of what's good enough for space travel. And so when we start thinking about mission design, spacecraft design, habitat design, it's really important to not just think about your own research. Again, think about the system overall. Think about the body as a system of systems, right? There's the musculoskeletal system, there's the immune system, there's the gut microbiome, the neuro vestibular system, the cognitive system. The body is a system of systems, and trying to figure out what is best for the body overall entails understanding what's happening with each individual system. Because, for example, if you ask a bone person, hey, I'm an engineer with VAST, what level of artificial gravity do I need? I'm going to say 1G. But a muscle person might say 1/3 G or 2/3 G. And, a brain person might say another level of gravity. And so getting everybody in an interdisciplinary team all in the same room to have that conversation is very important. You can't do space research without that kind of collaboration. Again, science of science, it's all connected. Okay, this is a picture of Tracy Dyson after returning from a spaceflight mission, which what's really interesting about these sort of returns is that you'll notice that when they come out of the spacecraft, they're not walking, right? They're picked up and carried around on a sofa or on a chair because your bones and your muscles are so much weaker after you return from space. And so thinking about how to rehabilitate people once they return from spaceflight is just as important to understanding what happens while they're in space as well. So how can we help them improve back to their baseline as soon as possible is another really valuable sort of underlooked aspect of space medicine, the recovery phase. So don't ignore that either. Okay, I want to take a little step back and think about what are the different hazards or stressors associated with spaceflight. I touched on microgravity, I touched on radiation, but again, it's the system of stressors. You have to remember that space is always trying to kill you. Not actively, but the space environment is still a very dangerous environment for people to be in, whether or not we're looking at the effects of isolation and confinement. For example, I talked about sleep disruption, but also team dynamics is a really important one. There's communication delays, there's, remote medicine happening there. There's environmental exposures, whether it's high carbon dioxide or decreased immune functions, all different types of deconditioning that happen from reduced gravity. Different types of space radiation are trying to kill you. Everything in space is trying to kill you. And so, understanding that again, it's not just one thing that's trying to kill you, it's a system of things that are trying to kill you. You have to be able to examine all of these factors in association with one another, not just in isolation. And these systems of stressors cause a system of effects on the human body. And so this is a rather terrifying image, I'll admit, of an astronaut from a paper I found. And what I want to leave you with isn't, the specifics of what's going on, but really, again, the system of spaceflight stressors has a system of effects on the human body. So it's not just bone loss, for example, it's muscle loss. There's fluid shifts, there's cognitive problems, you have balance problems, you have kidney problems, you have vascular problems in your legs and in your head. You have, problems with your force sensation because you're not registering downward force anymore. And so being able to understand all of these systems, again, in conjunction with each other, is really, really important for space medicine, probably more so than other fields, I would argue. For example, if you're a neurobiologist, you just have to know neurobiology. But for example, I've studied neurobiology, I've studied the immune system, I've studied the bone health, muscle health. Being able to understand all of these systems and how they interplay with one another is really important for this field, um, in a way that's sort of unique from other fields. So if you like that, that's a great. I enjoy sort of being a jack of all trades type of researcher, but I can completely understand that's not for everyone. I would just encourage you to explore, again, a lot of different fields within this field and see sort of what clicks with you the best. Okay, but space medicine, as I mentioned, is really associated with other extreme environments as well, right? We know space is an extreme environment, but there's a lot of different other ones out there that can serve as one, either analogs for space, or two, be completely valid fields in their own right. So, for example, this is a picture from the Neutral Buoyancy Lab at NASA. They do a lot of spacewalk training there because then there's sort of the at least reduced sense of gravity because of the buoyancy. And so when the astronauts are underwater, they're doing a lot of training there. But underwater medicine or hyperbaric medicine is really a field within its own right, right? You have to understand diving medicine, what's happening to our physiology when we're being compressed at high levels. Then we know, for example, the nitrogen will dissolve in our blood, and so divers can't surface too quickly because otherwise it'll boil out and cause something called the bends or decompression sickness. And so you have to understand a little bit of hyperbaric medicine to be able to work at the Neutral Buoyancy Lab at NASA for space medicine. And so that's another example of an extreme environment where the two are interrelated. There's Arctic medicine or like remote wilderness medicine. I touched a little bit on the communication delays and the lack of medical equipment up on the space station or in other environments in space. For example, if you're on a SpaceX spacecraft, or you're on a mission to the moon, or you're on a mission to Mars, there are pretty significant communication delays, which sort of mimic remote environments or wilderness medicine. There's harsh environments, and you have a very limited set of medical equipment, right? If I run out of Band-Aids, let's say, right? I can't just go down to the CVS or I can't just go to the hospital supply room and get more Band-Aids. I have what I have with me on a mission. And so things like exploration medical capability to understand what you need to take with you is really important. Or how much should we take? Everything at NASA is a conversation around volume and mass versus benefit. How useful is this piece of equipment in relation to how much it's going to cost us in terms of mass and volume? There's also high altitude medicine. So this is a group of people, I don't know who, at the altitude chambers at NASA because there's a lot of atmospheric shifts that happen when you're up in space. For example, higher levels of carbon dioxide is a really well-known problem that the space station has. And so understanding how people and physiology responds in high altitudes, for example, people climbing Everest, or for example, fighter pilots whose planes can't get like pressurized the way airplane cabins can be. Understanding how our physiology responds in altitude chambers is a really important application. So again, yes, the fighter pilots, like I talked about, NASA is not just space, it's aerospace, it's the Air and Space Administration. And so it includes a little bit of like aviation research, for example. A lot of work happens at the Air Force in these kind of extreme environments, trying to understand what's happening to these fighter pilots, because it's not just again, high altitude, it's other exposures as well. There's really high metabolic demand, or they could be undergoing circadian or sleep disruption. Understanding how those different stressors interact with one another to affect um, like military or combat medicine and combat physiology is really important for the Air Force. Something that I'm sort of really excited to share too is that there's something called centrifuging people, which is when you spin them around really, really fast and they experience high levels of gravity in this scenario. So we've mostly been talking about microgravity, but again, people like pilots or like drivers, like motorsports drivers, experience really high levels of gravity. So it's not just enough to look at the absence of something. What if you have too much of it? And so centrifuges are a really great way to study that kind of high gravity physiology. I was at this facility just a couple months ago doing high gravity research. And so this is a video of the centrifuge in action. You might have seen these videos before.
Take a deep breath. Your top, please. 1, 2, 3. Drop the shoulders. Please. 1, 2, 3. Squeeze your legs, squeeze your butt.
So that's a video of the fighter pilots in a centrifuge like this one, experiencing really high levels of G, so that when they go into, a jet, they know how to respond appropriately to the G environment so that they don't pass out, because that would be disastrous, right? If he passed out in his jet engine, in his cockpit, that would have really bad consequences. And so being able to train pilots and understand their physiology is really important is a really important application of these centrifuges when we think about biology in extreme environments. Okay, so I touched a little bit on like F1 drivers. I'm an F1 fan myself. And so again, it's not just high levels of gravity that they're experiencing. In their case, they also have, high metabolic demand. How are they able to sustain a high exercise capacity, when they're straining against all of these G forces while still be able to maintain a high level of cognitive performance? So both cognitive demand and physical demand are two different stressors on the human body in different ways. And so again, trying to understand cognitive demand alone, metabolic demand alone, and then in conjunction are really important avenues for study. So I'm sort of showing all of this as, a way to help you understand that biology in extreme environments is not just space. There's a lot of different settings in which you can do this kind of research that are completely all valuable for study, and they're all related to one another. So it makes it a little easy to jump between doing cool stuff in different environments, if that's what you're interested in. So I also want to expand a little bit. I know I talked about the point of this talk is primarily biology and extreme environments, but I feel like any space conversation would be remiss without also mentioning that we need more than just medicine in space. If we want to build or create like a thriving human community up in space, on the moon, on Mars, we need more than just human biology. We need every single aspect of human society recreated in that environment. And so that includes plant biology, for example. How do plant roots respond to gravity? How do the plants respond to the different lighting conditions, the different environmental conditions? This is how can we efficiently grow food when we're up in space? How can we grow crops on the moon? A very valuable avenue of study. I don't have a lot of exposure to it. My colleagues do. And so, again, having conversations with plant biologists to learn about what they're doing, because that's going to affect the human biology, right? What kind of nutrients are they trying to grow and trying to, process, and how does that affect the human biology? All of these interdisciplinary conversations are very important. But it's not just the biology or the science that matters. This is one of my favorite space-associated paintings. When Alexei Leonov, he was a Russian cosmonaut back in the 60s, he went to space for the first few times and he saw the sun rising over the Earth in this sort of sunrise, and he sketched it out. And these are paintings inspired by those sketches. Um, just a beautiful, beautiful image. And my point with this is that it's not just the science that speaks to us, it's the art, it's the media, it's the communication. Everything associated with space has sort of an awe-inspiring feel to it. And so I don't want you to think you have to restrict yourself to the sciences. I did a philosophy minor in undergrad. Right now, when I'm studying for my master's and my PhD theses, I'm not just doing scientific, quantitative, hard technical research. I'm also doing qualitative analysis. I'm talking to people. I'm doing surveys. I'm trying to understand the field in ways that are not just at the bench. And so, trying to keep that sort of sense of awe within you is very important when you're in this field, because it's hard. It's really hard. But if you have that sort of excitement and dedication and a willingness to do that hard work, I think it'll take you very far. And so, again, like what we say and how we feel about space is just as important as the technical effects that space has on our body. And so, for example, there absolutely is a place in space for the humanities. It's really important to not just be doing science there, but also be looking at the rhetoric that we're using, the films, the media. Um, Space law is a really important underappreciated, I think, field when we're thinking about, for example, the treaties or international law. How does that govern in space? Is it, every man for the or every person from themselves, right? No, we're not pirates. We're civilized. How can we, formalize those kind of trade laws, communication laws, export laws, things like that, all those policies? Or the economics of space, right? What makes space a worthwhile business venture for people? Thinking about all of these conversations beyond just space science is really important. And so I want to encourage you, if you have an interest, a non-science interest, like don't lose that. You can absolutely still explore it within the space context. Like I said, we're going to have to recreate every single aspect of human society in space if we want to create a thriving community there. And so that includes, again, every part of human society, not just the scientists. And I'm saying that as a scientist myself. Okay, I frequently get asked, how can I get involved as a student? And so I want to highlight a couple different opportunities for students. I don't want to leave this talk without doing so. And so, for example, I'm part of the American Society for Gravitational and Space Research, ASGSR. We have a student organization as well. There's ways to get involved with the student board of that. If you're a high school student, we have something called a SECA program, or Students and Early Career Associates. And that's how you can sort of learn about space science, get involved with societies involved in space science, sort of learn more about the behind the scenes of that sort of stuff. And so that's a really great way to get experience if you don't previously have it. There's also the Aerospace Medical Association. They also have a student org. I think it's called Aerospace Medical Students and Residents Organization, AMSRO. You don't have to be a medical student to be in AMSRO, but they also have really great like newsletters and webinar opportunities similar to this one that you can explore to get involved or learn more. If you're not in the US, there's also the European Low Gravity Research Association. They also have a student org called CELGRA, Students for ALGRA. AIAA, I'm not too familiar with, but I know they do a lot more on like the aerospace engineering side of things. Like I mentioned, pursuing things like NASA internships, or if your country has a space agency, the equivalent there, like space agency internships. I should really broaden this to not just be NASA. Um, or like rocket club competitions, university research opportunities. This last one is a very sort of underappreciated avenue for getting involved. The the research that's happening within the field is not just at NASA or ESA or JAXA or ISRO, like all of these national space agencies. There is a ton of research that's happening at universities. And so if you look up different professors at different universities, you'll be able to find research that's happening that's funded by these space agencies or funded through other avenues to do space research. And that can be a little bit easier to get your foot in the door by like emailing professors if they have space in their lab. Um, it can be a little bit easier, yeah, to get your foot in the door compared to, say, like a formal space agency internship, which can be really hard and have a lot of requirements and eligibility, stuff like that. So I highly encourage you to check out university research. But even if all of these like don't float your boat or you're not interested in it, do not hesitate to create your own opportunities. I've spoken to some really passionate students that have started space medicine podcasts, or they have like a space news blog that they've started that's really taken off and they have thousands of subscribers now. And these are, students just like you who wanted to get involved and talk to me about how can I, learn more about the field. And I said, hey, it can be really hard to do, formal opportunities like this. Go see what you can explore on your own. What can you, innovate? What can you start? And for example, like starting a podcast doesn't take a lot of equipment. Starting a blog doesn't take a lot of money. It just takes time. Everything will take time. And if you have the time and you have the dedication to do the work necessary, you will be able to get involved. Like the space field is absolutely comprised of people like yourself who are just passionate, really passionate about the field. Um, and they want to help students. And so if you start, emailing people, hey, can I host a webinar with you on space medicine and biology in extreme environments? People will say yes. You might not get a yes the first time around, but when I started at Johnson Space Center, my internship there, I didn't get a yes the first time around. I emailed 30, 40, 50 people trying to say, hey, do you need an intern with no experience? I'm really dedicated. I'm a hard worker. And a lot of people said no, but one person said yes. And so just, pursuing and dedicating yourself until you find that person who says yes is really important. Like, don't let 49 no's stop you from the 50th person saying yes. Okay, I think that's my entire spiel. Do any of you have any questions? We've got about 12 minutes left. Yes, Caleb.
Okay, can you hear me just fine?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so a plethora of questions really, arise after your presentation here. And the first of which, I'm going to kind of give you two. So the first is going to be, more technical, and the second is going to be more of like a recreational question, kind of just probing you a little bit. So the first one, especially with KMCs, I believe, is what you mentioned with the selection of medical technology and what to really, ensure that what's going to be effective up there. My biggest question is, when we do anything on Earth, we're so very, inherently bound by the rules of Earth. And no matter how much, we run tests or, kind of recreate these, environments of space, how do you ensure an approach that is not only effective, but also, kind of account for the unaccountable in your, research and really ensuring that something is implemented? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and I think it speaks to really the core of what space research is about. The short answer is that there's no way to completely account for everything, unfortunately. Um, Scenarios arise, maybe you didn't think of some really niche scenario, or a niche scenario happens and you didn't expect it. That will always be a possibility, unfortunately. We can't always completely de-risk something. That's what we call it, de-risking, when we do that kind of testing. But there are absolutely teams of people at NASA and within the space field whose whole job is de-risking. I attended a talk yesterday, so it's fresh on my mind actually, from a woman who leads and works with the team doing biomedical device innovation and implementation at NASA. And so her team is really concerned with looking at new hardware or new equipment and saying, is this safe enough for spaceflight? Will it do what it's intended to do? And will it do so effectively and safely? And so that includes a lot of equipment testing, a lot of efficacy testing beyond just the equipment itself, for example. Will it withstand the the temperature ranges that it'll get exposed to? Will it withstand the high G forces, the low atmospheric pressures? Is this material, for example, like a Band-Aid? Band-Aids have what in it? They have adhesive, they have fabric. Adhesive is really good at adhering, right? And being sticky. Will it stick to other things? Um, Adhesive will have like off-gassing properties. Will that be toxic to people? Will the fabric break off and cause debris or dirt in the space station that then, causes problems for astronauts or crew health? So the long answer that I'm now again trying to wrap up into the short answer is that there's no way to completely guarantee it, but there are teams of people dedicated to doing it as much as possible. Does that answer your question?
Definitely, I see what you mean. It's more so just a matter of how much can we do that is possible,
Exactly,
and just
exactly.
building as much of a reservoir of information as we can. And as for my second question, this is kind of more, I suppose, philosophical, still grounded, still pertinent to the kind of the scientific world. Having the privilege of being at just intellectual powerhouses like Harvard and MIT, I'm wondering, are you seeing this kind of trend in which there's kind of a paradigm shift in the sense that we're seeing a lot more experts who aren't experts in this very narrow field per se, but kind of this convergence of many fields, and not necessarily being an expert in every single one of those fields, but just an expert in how they are intertwined. And do you think that because for instance, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but Dr. Ben Rapoport, he's a neurosurgeon. Your program is actually his alma mater, and now he's doing a lot of stuff with brain computer interfaces. And he has his degree in electrical engineering as well as his doctorate. And I'm just wondering, do you think the future of experts are people who kind of understand how interconnected everything is and kind of see the little inefficiencies and how we can improve on these little things?
So I'm going to be very biased here. I'm a very interdisciplinary person myself, so I
Same.
absolutely think it's the future. I think it should have been the past as well. Um, I think I mean, again, the data has shown that interdisciplinary teams have more scientific impact when we think about these science of science things that I've been talking about. As an interdisciplinary researcher myself, being able to speak both to biologists and aerospace engineers and systems engineers, I can say sort of anecdotally has been absolutely useful for my career because right? Like space medicine doesn't just depend on the biology, it also depends on the spacecraft design, the engineering and life support systems. Being able to understand a little bit of the background of those systems has absolutely been important for understanding or like contextualizing my research. And so I do 100% think I'm a huge, huge proponent of being an interdisciplinary researcher and developing interdisciplinary skills. Absolutely.
Thank you. I knew your answer was going to be something along the lines of that.
Yeah.
I just wanted to really, get it in writing. All right. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Any other questions, folks? I'll stop sharing.
I have a question if that's
Mhm.
okay. It's a
Absolutely.
bit more, I'm gonna pretend that I'm coming from a place of where I don't know anything about space medicine, but when we were planning this webinar, our exec team at Houston was having a conversation about space research because of course we were all very excited to have you on, but we started having this debate about how useful medicine research is now in comparison to like I guess spending money or funding other fields because from I guess topics from war to climate change and stuff, I'm talking in a very ignorant perspective right now. But if someone came up to you and asked you, um, why you're doing space research when there's so many other things to be thinking about or funding, how would you reply to them?
That's that's not an ignorant question. I want to say that. I have been asked that a lot of times. I actually got asked that in one of my PhD interviews. I wasn't expecting it, so I was completely thrown off. But now I have a little bit of a better sense of how to answer it, and I think there's a couple different routes you can go with that answer. The first is sort of yes, money is a zero-sum game, but not as much as you would think. Like, space research benefits things like climate research. For example, the project that I was doing with GISS, with the PACE satellite looking at algorithm development, that's space research, absolutely. But it also is for the purposes of ocean monitoring to understand the ocean health, which is associated with climate change, right? And so or like space technologies have absolutely been useful for monitoring climate health, for monitoring like war, for example, our satellite imagery. Um, it's not a zero-sum game, is the first thing that I want to say. There's a lot of synergy and um, return that space research gives back down to Earth. Another thing I will say is that we also, at least I know the numbers for the US. I can't speak for the global space economy. Um, the US spends way less on space research than they think. Everybody, I think, loves to, what's the word? Like when they're panicking about something, like they love to panic about the NASA budget. The I think the current NASA budget is maybe like 0.4% of federal spending during the Apollo era, when we had money to spend, it was maybe like a couple percent. I want to say 3, 4%. And we did some really incredible things with those 3, 4%. And so even now, we're doing really incredible things with the 0.4%. It's really not enough to keep the lights on, but that's a separate conversation. And so like we're not spending as much on NASA that as people think we are. And so I think there's a little bit of panic about it, but in my opinion, it's a little bit of a false panic. Um, but I think those two things, like one, we're really not spending that much money. Two, it's not a zero-sum game. Space research benefits Earth research. And three, honestly, I'm just not as interested in that biology. Like for me, I'm interested in biology in extreme environments, and so that's what I want to study. There's people who are more interested in cancer biology, and so that's what they study. I think, again, speaking to when we think about recreating a human society in space, again, we'll need to recreate everything, and so that includes all the interests. For me, that interest is space medicine and biology in extreme environments, and I think it would be almost a little unfair to be like, no, you have to study cancer biology because that's what we deem is most important, right? That's like telling an artist, why do you study art when there's more important things to be studying? You know, art is absolutely important in its own right. Um, those comparisons are like they don't make a lot of sense. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so
Okay.
much. I know it's
Hopefully
almost
it
the
gave
end of.
you, yeah, hopefully it gave you a couple like answers to have in your arsenal. Because if you do go into the field, just prepare yourself. You're going to get asked that a lot of times.
It's
So having those
interesting
on
because
lock, yeah.
definitely because I've had this conversation with a lot of people, and I feel like now there's a greater pressure to do something that's useful right now, especially because, well, cost of living being one thing. I'm from the UK, so that's a big pressure over there to do something useful. And then there's also, growing, pressing, global issues in itself. So yeah, it's good to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah. And I don't want
I
to say that I'm like minimizing or dismissing any of those issues. They're absolutely important as well. But my point is that we can do space research and still benefit the world, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely. Um, Thank you so much. I
Of
know our
course.
time's up, so I just want to say thank you. That was an incredible presentation, and we're ever so grateful to have you speak for us.